I've always been pretty fond of the Mega Man series. I've played loads of these games over the years, but between the classic 2D games and the later entries, there are just so many side series and spin-offs, I find it hard to choose a favorite. But the one that introduced me to the series in the first place was Mega Man Battle Network. Originally released in the early 2000s for the Game Boy Advance, Mega Man Battle Network had you set in a completely different world, more like an internet-based utopia. Instead of the robot Mega Man, you played as Lan Hikari and his Net Navi, MegaMan.EXE, who would fight battles against viruses and cybercrime organizations on the net. The stories were your typical shonen fare, with a young man that tries to beat the bad guys, slowly gaining power over things through friendship and teamwork. It's pretty cheesy with some hilariously dated internet references, but I think that in retrospect, it can be really endearing. Along with that though, the gameplay in Battle Network was completely rebuilt from the ground up. Capcom developed a brand new RPG combat system based around deck building and action done on these 3x6 grids. You could collect cards, contextualized as battle chips, that allowed Mega Man to fight with new abilities, all while upgrading his base stats with a variety of different things. Even after all these years, I think the combat in Battle Network holds up considerably well. The games would slowly evolve the deck building and combat, and it got to a point where it was pretty frantic, but always easy to understand. But the funny thing was, for the longest time, the only Battle Network game I owned wasn't an RPG. It was this, Mega Man Network Transmission for the GameCube. As one of the sub-series' few spin-offs, it was developed out of house by Arika, a studio founded by past Capcom employees. Arika's got a pretty interesting development history, originally focusing on the Street Fighter EX games, and later being known for their Nintendo projects, like Endless Ocean and Tetris 99. But what I find the most interesting about Network Transmission is that it actually kind of undid the RPG gameplay established in Battle Network, and instead returned to side-scrolling action like Mega Man Classic. Network Transmission retains a lot of aspects from the Battle Network series still, like battle chips and deck building, but reapplied it to make something unique. It technically wasn't the only game in the Battle Network series to do this, since there was a 2D platformer for the WonderSwan Color, but it was the only one released worldwide and for a major platform, so I won't be covering that here. Sorry to all the dozen WonderSwan Color fans. I know you're out there. I really enjoyed this game back when it was new, but I don't think I ever finished it. So I thought today we could take a look at this Mega Man spin-off of a spin-off that tried to undo its RPG series and return it to those 2D classic elements. Mega Man Network Transmission is sort of like a filler arc of an anime, and it takes place between the first Mega Man Battle Network game and the second. It starts by retelling the ending of the first game, where Mega Man and Lan take out the life virus. 1 month after taking care of World 3, abbreviated as WWW, Lan is hanging around blowing off his homework until he finds out that his friend Mail's Net Navi, Roll, has gone missing somewhere in cyberspace. This leads Mega Man and Lan to hop online and look for them, quickly dropping you into the first level. Like I said, the gameplay here takes the JRPG aspects of the Game Boy Advance games and brings them back into the classic 2D Mega Man style. The GameCube wasn't known for its 2D platformers, and as much as I like the GameCube controller, it isn't really built for this type of game. A pretty long time ago, I picked up this Circa D-pad controller, and I finally have a good use for it. This isn't an ad or anything, I don't even know if they still make these, but it's based on an old Hori pad design that came out back when the GameCube was still new, and it basically plays like a Super Nintendo controller. It's pretty great for this game in particular, and I ended up using it for the entire playthrough, so I felt like I should mention it. Anyway, in Network Transmission, you can run around, jump, shoot, and slide, just like in many of the original Mega Man games, and it all feels pretty good to control. Mega Man is appropriately easy to move around as, and if you've played any of the main 2D games, it has a similar sort of precision control to it. But something you'll notice quickly is that your default buster shots are incredibly weak to start. This is because you have to make use of the battle chips that the Battle Network series was built around. Every few minutes, the custom bar on the top of the screen will fill up, and you can press Z to load in a new set of chips to fight with. At the beginning, you have a pretty decent variety, from cannons to swords to bombs, each with their own use cases. These are most similar to the Robot Master abilities from classic Mega Man, so it takes a little bit of your energy meter to use every chip. The only difference being that you automatically charge energy here. The default shots, though, only fire in a straight line, so other chips can be useful in certain scenarios. Maybe there's an enemy below you that's hard to reach, so it's best to use a bomb, that sort of thing. It's really just satisfying to see the way that they reintegrate these battle chips in a 2D platformer setting versus what they were doing in the grid-based combat of the Game Boy games. It's funny how the different shapes of swords in particular have to be turned into these weird, awkward animations. So wide sword becomes a taller vertical slash, and long sword just kind of reaches further. One of my bigger problems though is that the animations just take way too long, and it can lead to some pretty frustrating moments. If you're on a rail and you try to use a bomb or a sword chip, you'll just fall and die. Eventually, the other chips will find their uses, but for now, it's a lot easier to use shot-based weapons like the cannon, just because they fire faster. After you make it to roll, you find out that Fireman has been rampaging through the net and trying to burn the whole place down, and this becomes the first proper stage of the game. A lot of classic Mega Man level tropes will show up in Network Transmission, and it'll reuse a lot of level designs from the classic Mega Man games as well. It's a pretty standard classic Mega Man level where you'd climb some ladders, jump around, fight a little mini-boss, and eventually you'll be at the first boss of the game. Fireman, though, can be weirdly hard to beat. I can imagine people that hadn't played Mega Man Battle Network or classic Mega Man games would have a lot of trouble with this. When I first played the game years ago, it would take several attempts to just get out of the tutorial here because of Fireman. But if you do know how things work in the source material, you could take advantage of things. For example, you could use the water-type bubbler chip in your deck to clear him up pretty quickly. Or you could wait around and try to get a program advance from your battle chips. Program advances are special attacks you get to use when you use specific chips in a certain order. So if you use a sword, wide sword, and then long sword in a row, you can use life sword and knock out half of Fireman's health at once. No matter what you do though, your basic shots are pretty much useless here, so it's best to use those chips whenever you can to try to get through Fireman. It turns out that despite his past with World 3, Fireman wasn't being told to do anything. He'd recently taken a vaccine in order to deal with the Zero virus, which has been spreading throughout the net in the past weeks, but his operator, Mr. Match, wasn't up to anything. If you've played the MegaMan.EXE series, the Zero virus will sound pretty familiar, but we'll get to that later on. For now, it seems that these fake cures have been distributed out onto the net by a mysterious Navi, and so Mega Man and Lan make it their mission to go out and look for them, setting up the plot for the rest of the game. Despite being based on the RPG series, the structure of Network Transmission is a little different. Instead of exploring the real world looking for somewhere to plug in Mega Man, you instead just open a world map and jack into specific locations. I would have liked to see a 3D open world, but at least it saves some time running between locations, like you have to do in the regular Battle Network games. The Game Boy Advance games would often involve you running around the real world as Lan before jumping into net sections with Mega Man. But in this one, he's hopelessly addicted to his devices, and he just walks around in circles until you start the game. While the game plays like a 2D Mega Man, there are still these sort of overworld network areas between levels. There are loads of secrets tucked in every location, including the stages, that usually offer extra upgrades or chips. You can find backups which permanently give you an extra life, HP and memory upgrades that expand your health or energy meters, and power-ups to upgrade your default buster. I really like these small little platforming puzzles that crop up from time to time. They're entirely optional, thankfully, but fun to try and get through. Most of the time, they involve you doing some precise jumps from one block to another, using one or two chips in creative ways to advance. Unfortunately, pretty much the whole game is built out of these little blocks and panels, so it can look a little boring at times, but at least they get to use them in a fun and creative way. After running around a little bit more and doing battle with a virus-controlled Gutsman, the game opens up in a pretty familiar way. Lan gets emails from a bunch of his friends, and each of them are caught in a different predicament. This sets up 4 different levels, each with their own unique theme and boss, being the garden, shopping district, bank, and aquarium. Along with that, each stage's boss kind of has a classic Mega Man weakness path. You started with Fireman's fire type, which is good on Needleman, whose wood type works well on Brightman's elect type, who's also in turn good on Iceman's water type. And then there's the neutral type Quickman, who fits anywhere between them. I tried to start with Needleman, but ended up dying on that level and doing Iceman's stage first, because it would just happen to be easier. It can be pretty surprising though how tough this game is so early on. Mega Man games tend to be on the harder side, and the same goes here, but I think that the way it scales is a bit off in this one. There are a few reasons why I think it's like this, and we'll get into it, but I think it's mostly due to the level design. There are some pretty cruel areas in these first few levels, with some mechanics that can be just frustrating to play through. A lot of classic Mega Man level tropes reappear in Network Transmission, so Iceman has those annoying disappearing blocks, and Quickman has those one-hit kill beams. For a veteran Mega Man player, these might not be so bad on their own, but it is surprising to me how early it drops it all on you. Because of the addition of the RPG mechanics, it sometimes feels like you're just not ready for these challenges yet. Weirdly enough though, this is the only time that these things are a problem. I found that the stage designs over time just got easier, and the extra lives and buster upgrades you'd eventually unlock later on actually just makes every stage just smoother to play. This early on though, dying twice in a level means you only have one shot to beat the boss before you have to do the whole stage over again. That and the fact that if you have the right chips later on, you can bypass a lot of the hardest challenges, but you just can't do it in these first 4 levels. At this point, the scream when you die is lodged very deep in my brain. I can hear it now.
Oh, dang it!
Looking back at it now, the game also has these weird knowledge checks that made the game infinitely harder to play when I was just a kid. In the original Battle Network games, you would get a rank based on how quickly you handled the random encounters, and the ranks would determine what you were given between money, healing, or common to rare chips. Being a deck building RPG, collecting good chips was obviously important, and getting a good rank in every battle was important to doing that. But it happens to be that that's how it works in Network Transmission too, and they just don't really tell you that in-game. Enemies seem to randomly drop battle chips that you can pick up, but if you don't defeat them quickly, they just won't give you anything. You also aren't clearly told what chip you earned, or if it's a duplicate. Grabbing chips that you already own increases the max number you can use without backing out, so it's often best practice to grind for the better chips. There are some of these things that I would consider nearly mandatory because they make the game's difficulty a lot easier to manage. In Iceman's stage, these flying penguins give you the double jump chip, which is by far the easiest way to access dozens of secret areas, and in turn pick up valuable upgrades. But without understanding why or how to get the chip, you could easily miss all of it, or get stuck with one copy of double jump that isn't nearly enough to get you through a level. It's an absolute must-have in my opinion, and I would have it equipped almost the entire playthrough. A lot of this info is actually in the manual, but I would have to assume that you just didn't read it, and you just assumed that the game was kind of difficult. One funny thing to mention, when you get to the end of a stage, every boss has this little intro, just like Fireman had. I've always found them to be so weird and stilted. They're incredibly quick and use these weird stock sound effects, and something about the way that they just end as soon as the animation is complete kinda cracks me up. Most of the bosses in the game are actually pretty easy after a few attempts. but Brightman has got to be the exception. I genuinely have no clue how you're supposed to beat him. He has this counter attack that activates whenever you try to attack, but the timing you have to hit him between the stance must be a fraction of a second. I ended up just sending a pellet to lock him into the counter stance and then whittled his health down as much as I could. He's not the only boss in the game to have a barrier like this, and those bosses tend to be the harder ones. But Brightman in particular feels just broken, and he was the last one I finished. I was happy to get it over with. I think of Network Transmission's story as broken up into 3 acts, defined by the outro artwork that shows up anytime you finish a boss. And with those 4 stages complete, we move on to Act 2, which is the shortest part of the game. This is more of the same. Lan and MegaMan decide to investigate 2 more locations this time, while his dad is working on a cure for the Zero virus. 2 stages open up being the power plant with Electman and the arcade with Colorman. But these stages are much easier than the previous 4 in basically every way, and I had a good time just exploring the stages and fighting the bosses. I even found this secret area with a slot machine in Colorman stage, which I had no idea was even a thing. MegaMan's Buster at this point has a few upgrades, so fighting enemies isn't as much of a struggle anymore, though I found that the Buster starts to outperform your chips at this point. Colorman I beat without using chips at all, which sort of defeats the purpose of having them. I feel like that this game being set right after Battle Network 1 actually might have hurt the balancing in this regard. In the first game, the Buster also gets super overpowered by the end of the game, and it's something the series would address later on. While the Buster can be pretty broken, there's always the risk of getting hit while charging it, so you do have to use chips every once in a while to supplement it. The best thing to do is to maintain your chip folder by adding new stuff you find so that it keeps up with your Buster's power. After those first 4 levels, enemies and the chips that they drop start to be a little stronger. Coming up with good strategies and synergies was a little bit more important in the later entries of the series, but here it's kinda just up to your own preference. I generally avoided chips that took longer to use, but found that it was important to keep some that work for bosses and others for exploring levels. There aren't any letter codes like in Battle Network, so you don't have to worry about drawing a bad hand. It's usually just best to use whatever chip does the most damage and what you have the most ammo for. If you get a high rank on a boss, you can also earn a summoning chip that functions a lot like in the Game Boy games, but they're usually not great for boss fights and take a long time to use, so I mostly just use roll because it heals. I can't stress how cool it is though to see the RPG elements recontextualized in a classic 2D Mega Man game, even if sometimes the variety on offer can be a bit underwhelming. There aren't many of the really interesting chips available, but I doubt they're easy to implement in a completely different genre. This section of the game is pretty short, like I said, so let's take a minute to talk about the game's presentation. You could probably already tell that Network Transmission isn't the prettiest GameCube game. Character models are pretty simple, and stages are almost entirely made out of individual blocks. There are a few locations that look decent, but I really don't think the game does justice to some of the fantastic pixel art and character designs that the Battle Network series had. The cell shading helps the characters pop out, but they're often just a little off model. It's not exactly the pinnacle of graphics for the generation. It's almost to be expected because it is on the GameCube after all, but I just wish that they were a little bit better detailed. Just really makes me wish that we had a proper 3D Battle Network later on. Environments, especially the backgrounds, are still pretty good. Something to note though is the entire game is voiced over by the Japanese cast from the anime. There's even a TV Tokyo credit on the main menu. It's too bad that the game wasn't properly localized, and there are actually some weird translations in the game, but it's pretty obvious that it isn't the highest budget release anyway. For me personally, having played this game so much growing up though, these voices have kind of become the default for the characters. Not that I dislike the English cast from the dub, but I actually didn't have access to that show when it was new, so I'm just so used to these Japanese voices. This was one of those games where I played it so much that I just memorized those voice lines. I kind of love the little phrases that you get when you select your chips or when you exit a stage, and the way that Mega Man yells at you when you get hit is just kind of fun. It's not like these games require you to know what they're saying anyway. I remember I even patched out the English voices from Battle Network 5 on DS because I just couldn't get used to it.
Let's bust some viruses!
So yeah, the graphics aren't the greatest and there's only Japanese voiceover, but the music in network transmission did not miss. The overworld music to the boss battle songs and everything in between is amazing. Generally speaking, Mega Man is one of those series that always has fantastic music. It's a great soundtrack for sure, and one that I find myself coming back to every once in a while. Since the game is somewhat based on the anime, there's also a remix of the opening theme from that here as well. The music's been playing throughout the video, and if you're curious about what the title is, I always put them up there in the corner. After taking care of Color Man, Lan discovers that Mega Man has caught the Zero virus himself, and there's currently no cure. That is, unless somebody finds a way to enter the Zero account, a cornered off area of the net created by World 3. It seems the Zero virus was made by Wily, but it was left abandoned there for some reason. All this leads to you meeting with Proto Man, who shows you the way to the next set of levels. The levels that start out the third act aren't the most interesting, but they are very solid. Swordman stage is an ancient area of the web, Gravity Man has you doing some cool upside down sections, and after that you get to Starman's space level. Starman was the Navi that was distributing the bad cures for the virus early on, though I think that he was intended to be more important to the story than he is. At least his stage is a good time though. The music is great and the low gravity is a simple and fun mechanic. At this point, the game is actually pretty easy. With the right chips and enough upgrades, it isn't hard at all to get by. I might not be flying through the game, I'll still die every once in a while, but there aren't nearly as many annoying sections at the halfway point. I think it's really just unfortunate that the game scales difficulty like this. If you had swapped Quickman and Swordman's levels and then maybe given you a few more lives to start with, I think the game would be so much easier for first-time players. There's a really solid Mega Man game here, but it just might not feel that way because the first few stages were so grueling. I don't know if you care, but there is a bit of a spoilery section at this point. I already kind of spoiled some stuff. I don't know. Once you get to the Zero account though, it feels like it's almost a finale, though it actually isn't. It's a smaller location with some goodies on the sides worth collecting, but it's mostly a short line straight to the boss gate. Deep inside the zone lies Zero, a Navi-like virus who has gained sentience. Viruses typically can't speak in Battle Network or have a conscience like he does, but he's been learning about the world by listening through Navis infected by the virus. He obviously sees Mega Man as a threat, and of course they have to fight. Zero's design is so cool. Like most of the character models in the game though, his 2D artwork just isn't done justice. He's one of the only characters in the series to not be based on a classic Mega Man character, and instead inspired by Zero from the X series, which is pretty cool to see. I also really like the way that they used the Zero virus as a concept. The Net Navis throughout the game have basically been going Maverick like they do in the X series, so it almost feels like a bit of a crossover. The Zero virus being a thing to begin with just makes sense too, because the whole point of Battle Network is that you're fighting viruses. Zero's boss fight is pretty challenging, and I think he uses moves that are inspired by MegaMan.EXE, which is really cool to see too. After the boss, Zero is actually destroyed by Proto Man, and the story continues on without them. But if you found this mystery data key item somewhere else before the battle, you can actually save his life. If you do have the item, Lan's dad pops in last minute and discovers that they could convert Zero into a Net Navi. Saving him gives you the Zero summon chip as a bonus too. Regardless of what happens to them, the problems aren't quite over though, because somebody known as the Professor reveals himself to be behind the entire thing. For some reason, instead of using the Zero virus itself to take over the world, he felt the need to fundraise for another life virus. But I guess that's just how it worked out, so Lan and MegaMan have to find out how to beat him. The life virus is somewhere tucked it deep into the undernet, further into cyberspace. But the way in is blocked, so there are 2 more stages to complete to locate the key. Shadow Man is in AC/DC Town's vacant lot, and Pharaoh Man is in a secret World 3 area on the net. They're both solid, fun levels, and both bring back some fun stage elements from older Mega Man games. Boss battles in this game can get incredibly hectic at times. I was pretty overwhelmed by all the noises and flashing during Pharaoh Man's fight the first time I got to it. Even if it isn't actually that difficult, there are a lot of situations in the game where there's so much going on and you just keep getting hit by stuff. You could argue that the bosses in Battle Network are badly designed. I'm not sure if I would, but I'd have to say that a lot of them can just be overwhelming, and they tend to turn into slap fights. I really like the little detail of trophies that accumulate after you beat each boss. With nearly all of the bosses cleared, Lan's room is stuffed with figures. If you're playing this game, I think at this point it might go one of 2 ways. You either explored a fair bit, got a lot of upgrades, got all the chips that you needed, and you knew from the Game Boy Advance games that you can break the life barriers by doing 100 damage. Or you're like me forever ago and somehow fumbled and brute forced your way all the way to this point, only to face the reality that 1 program advance is not enough to beat the game. Thankfully this time I'm in the first camp, but I pretty much got stuck at this point multiple times throughout the years. But like most older games, when you come back as an adult having played 100 different games at this point, it's much easier. I could have waited around grinding for some really busted chips, but decided I was ready to challenge the end game anyway. The only thing I made sure to grab were the life aura chips from the enemies here, which block all damage below 80, making the endgame a lot more manageable. There's one sort of boss that you battle, and then you end up getting surrounded, but the gang shows up to save Mega Man. With them holding everybody off, you can jump down to face the life virus. But not before a quick break. I haven't mentioned it yet, but this game involves a lot of waiting around in front of boss doors. The custom gauge takes a few minutes to refill, and because of that, it's often most efficient to wait around and make sure you have a good setup for a battle just before you get into it. I have a lot of footage of me waiting in front of the door, burning through chips I don't want to use so that I have the best possible hand in advance. It's a weird quirk of the mechanic and it probably should have been based on something else to refill it, but break time is over, got a good setup going, and it's time to enter the final boss. Life Virus R has its own life aura, which means you have to use chips that do at least 100 damage or you can't even hurt it. But it's such a huge target that you can just basically throw anything at it. Mega Man's Buster is so powerful at this point that you can use whatever you need to break the barrier and then just blast away. The second phase is simple as well, just a floating virus that drops bubbles on you. You just dodge them while shooting charge shots. It's actually really similar to the alien final boss in Mega Man 2, so it's one last classic Mega Man reference to cap out the game. With the Life Virus R destroyed, the authorities raid the professor's hideout and take them into custody. Zero, who we managed to save earlier, found their location by scanning the remaining infected computers, one of which was the professor's. If you didn't save Zero, the cops just find him through an error with the life virus or something after you destroy it. With the day saved, Zero decides to explore the net on his own, and now everyone can return to their lives in peace. After the credits, there's a little teaser for Battle Network 2, but there are still a few things left to do. You can gather up all the chips and clear out the library, but more importantly, you can rematch every boss to earn their summon chips, which will open up a secret post-game battle. This means going through each fight, trying to clear them as fast as possible, without taking too much damage so that you can earn that boss chip. I also had to go back and fight Proto Man, who is an optional boss fight that I just didn't do until the end of the game. Life Aura trivializes a lot of these battles, but some of them took me a while to clear. After a bit of struggling through higher ranks on some of the bosses, I had all the chips and got an email from Mail about a hidden spot on the net. If you go past an exit near an early area of the net, you can find a gate that only opens if you have every boss chip in your inventory. This actually includes the Zero chip, so if you didn't save his life, you can't do this post-game battle. Of course, after you enter, the secret boss had to be Bass. He floats around and chucks a bunch of projectiles at you, and the battle is pretty difficult. It had me seriously worried because his health bar just doesn't move. Thankfully, it turns out that you only need to take about 1/10 of his health off to win, and I just had to properly set up with the Z Cannon Program Advance, along with some healing chips to survive. If you do enough to him though, Bass decides to let it go and leaves behind a boss chip. It's just a teaser for the next game, which involved Bass a lot more, but it works really well here because he's kind of the de facto secret boss of the series. Honestly, I don't typically do a lot of post-game stuff when I play games, but it was pretty nice to see this thing and it wasn't too much work to get to. I have to say though, it's very satisfying to finally finish a game that I've been playing forever but never properly ended. Mega Man Network Transmission is a strange sort of a game. A spin-off of a spin-off that takes the original source material and merges it with an RPG sub-series. It certainly falters in some places, but it stands out in a lot of other ways, and it brings a lot of cool, fun new ideas to classic Mega Man. Even if they don't always work, it's really unique in its execution. I think it would have been cool to have some more original concepts taken directly from Battle Network, because the majority of the level concepts are just taken directly from the NES Mega Man games. In the end though, I grew up playing this one and stuck with it despite its flaws because I loved that world and the characters. If I had to be honest, I don't think Mega Man Network Transmission is one of the best Mega Man games, but it might be at least a hidden gem from the series. It's certainly a lot better than it had any reason to be. In the context of the time it was released, the GameCube's library just didn't have many original side-scrolling platformers to go around. So looking back at it today, it's a great extra for fans of Battle Network, but also functions as a really solid recommendation for the GameCube. I certainly think it's worth having around if you're a fan of either the series or the console it was released on, because it was exclusive and it's never been re-released. The Legacy Collection released a few years ago for Switch and all the major platforms, but it didn't include Network Transmission, which I think is a huge missed opportunity. Does it have Battle Chip Challenge either? What the heck, guys? Either way, I'm glad to have finally closed the book on Network Transmission. But that's it for the video, and this is where I wrap things up. I hope you liked the video, and if you had a good time here, I'd really appreciate your support by liking the video, leaving a comment of your thoughts below, and doing the hype thing if that shows up. I don't know how it works. If you'd like to see more stuff from me in the future, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell and all that fun stuff. Either way, thanks again for watching, and take care.